The sketchbook fell from my hands and landed face down on the linoleum floor. I stood frozen in the doorway of our cramped kitchen, watching my mother's fingers move across my drawings, the ones I'd spent 3 months perfecting. Her hands moved quickly, mechanically, pulling each page free from the wire binding. The sound of tearing paper cut through the silence between us. "Mum?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. She didn't look up, just kept stacking the pages into a neat pile, smoothing them with her palm like they were grocery receipts. The afternoon light caught the desperate efficiency in her movements. "I need gas money." Her tone was flat, matter-of-fact. "That art dealer on Morrison Street pays cash for original work." My throat closed. Those weren't just drawings. They were my college portfolio, 12 architectural sketches of imagined buildings, each one a bridge between fantasy and technical precision. Gothic spires meeting modern glass, Victorian details bleeding into brutalist forms. I'd poured every spare hour into them, filling the margins of my existence with graphite and dreams. "Those are for my application," I managed, "for the scholarship." "You can redraw them." She finally met my eyes, and what I saw there wasn't cruelty, just exhausted pragmatism. "Besides, Isabella got accepted to nursing school. The deposit is due next week." Isabella. Of course it was about Isabella. My younger sister, the golden child who actually wanted something practical, something that made sense to our parents. Not like me, wasting time on pictures of buildings that don't exist, when I could be working double shifts at the diner like Mum did. I spent months, and I've spent 18 years keeping a roof over your head. Her voice sharpened. "Isabella's going to be a nurse, Clara. A nurse. Do you understand what that means? Stability. A real future. Not this fantasy world you keep drawing yourself into." The words hung between us like smoke. I wanted to argue, to explain that my fantasies had floor plans and load-bearing calculations, that I taught myself perspective and proportion from library books because we couldn't afford classes. But the exhaustion in her eyes stopped me. She gathered the sketches and walked past me toward the door, her shoulder brushing mine. The contact felt like an ending. "I'll be back in an hour," she said. "There's pasta in the fridge." The door clicked shut. I stood there listening to her car start, then pull away, taking my future with it. I didn't cry. Couldn't. The hurt went too deep for tears, settling somewhere beneath my ribcage like a stone in standing water. I walked to my room and sat on the bed, staring at the empty sketchbook spine on my desk. The wire binding curled like a broken promise. My phone buzzed, a text from my best friend Jade. "How's the portfolio coming?" I stared at the words until they blurred. How could I explain? How could I tell her that my own mother had just sold my dreams for $30 in gas money and a deposit on my sister's legitimacy? I didn't respond, just set the phone face down and lay back on the bed. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a bird with broken wings. I'd noticed it years ago, had even sketched it once, trying to find beauty in our poverty. Now it just looked like what it was, damage we couldn't afford to fix. Time moved strangely. The room darkened by degrees. I heard Mum come home, heard her and Isabella laughing about something in the kitchen. The sound of their closeness, their easy understanding, felt like another country, one where I didn't speak the language. Around midnight, I got up and opened my desk drawer. Inside was a bottle of sleeping pills Dr. Hammond had prescribed after I'd spent 3 days unable to sleep before finals. "Just for emergencies," he'd said. I stared at the bottle for a long time. It wasn't a decision, not really. More like gravity, a natural conclusion to an equation that had never quite balanced. If my own mother couldn't see my worth, couldn't recognize that my sketches were more than paper and graphite, they were my voice, my vision, my only way of mattering, then what was I fighting for? I took the bottle to the kitchen and filled a glass with water. The pills were small and white, innocent looking. I counted them out on the counter. 32. More than enough. I swallowed them in groups of 4, washing each cluster down with careful sips. The process felt ceremonial, final. With each swallow, the weight in my chest grew lighter. By the time I finished, I felt almost peaceful. I walked back to my room and lay down, pulled the covers up to my chin like I was settling in for an ordinary night's sleep. The water stain on the ceiling blurred, reformed, blurred again. My heartbeat slowed to a distant drum. The edges of the room softened, retreated. I thought about my sketches, wondered if the art dealer would frame them, if anyone would see the precision in those lines and understand that they meant something. The darkness came gradually, gently, like falling asleep after an exhausting day, like finally being allowed to rest. I opened my eyes to sunlight cutting through thin curtains. For a moment, I didn't understand. The pills should have worked. The darkness should have been permanent. But here I was, breathing, seeing, feeling the rough texture of old sheets beneath my fingers. I sat up slowly. The room swam into focus. My childhood bedroom, but younger somehow. The walls were a different colour, a pale yellow I remembered from years ago. My desk was covered in art supplies I thought I'd thrown away. The poster of Zaha Hadid's Haydar Aliyev Centre hung above my bed, corners pristine, not yet curled with age and humidity. My hands, I looked down at my hands. The scar from the diner's fryer was gone. My nails were unpainted, shorter than I'd kept them. My skin looked somehow newer, less tired. I stood and walked to the mirror. The face staring back was mine, but younger, smoother. I was maybe 15, maybe 16. Before the worst of it, before the constant comparisons to Isabella had calcified into daily disappointment. The realization came slowly, then all at once, like ice cracking on a winter pond. I remembered everything, the sketches, the betrayal, the pills, the feeling of my life draining away in that dark room. But I was here now, in a body that hadn't lived through any of it yet. Rebirth, second chance, time reset. The concepts felt impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. I was breathing in a past that hadn't happened yet, armed with memory of a future I'd escaped. My door opened. Mum stood there, younger too, with fewer lines around her eyes. "Clara, breakfast is ready. Don't be late for school." Her voice was the same, but the weight of what was to come hadn't yet pressed down on her. She looked almost kind. "I'll be right there," I heard myself say. She nodded and left. I sat back down on the bed, my mind racing through implications and possibilities. I knew what was coming. In 3 years, I would pour my soul into those architectural sketches. In 3 years, Isabella would get into nursing school. In 3 years, Mum would tear apart my portfolio for gas money and a deposit, and I would swallow pills in the dark. But that was the future I died in. This was something else. This was a blank page with memory for a pencil. I went to my desk and opened the drawer. Inside were sketch pencils, charcoal sticks, a brand new sketchbook with a pristine spiral binding. I ran my fingers over the smooth cover. Not yet, I thought. Not the same way. I would still draw, still dream of buildings that didn't exist. But this time, I would protect them. This time I would understand that the people who couldn't see your worth weren't blind. They simply weren't looking. And I wouldn't let them look away again. The next 3 years unfolded like a carefully composed drawing. I still spent hours with my sketchbooks, but I changed how I shared them. I stopped leaving them on the kitchen table where Mum could flip through them with distracted indifference. I stopped trying to explain my architectural visions to a family that saw only impractical fantasies. Instead, I started taking photographs of every sketch I completed, digital backups stored on cheap flash drives hidden in the lining of my winter coat, copies of copies, insurance against love that didn't know how to protect. The first year back, I focused on foundations. I took a part-time job at a coffee shop, not the diner where Mum worked, but a place across town where architectural students from the community college studied. I listened to them talk about their projects, their professors, their dreams. I learnt the language of legitimacy, the vocabulary that made drawing buildings sound like pursuing architectural design. I saved every dollar earned. Opened a bank account Mum didn't know about, building my escape fund coin by coin, shift by shift. The work was exhausting, balancing school and the coffee shop and my secret artistic life. But exhaustion felt purposeful now. Every tired muscle was evidence of building something real. At home, I became a student of strategic invisibility. When Mum compared me to Isabella, I didn't argue or shrink. I simply nodded and changed the subject. When they celebrated my sister's achievements, and there were many, I applauded alongside them, saving my own victories for spaces they couldn't diminish. Isabella was genuinely brilliant at what she did. I watched her study anatomy and pharmacology with the same intensity I brought to understanding cantilevers and stress distribution. In another life, in another family, we might have celebrated each other's different forms of genius. But our parents had only taught us competition, had only shown us that love was a limited resource to be rationed and fought over. So, I stopped fighting, let Isabella have the spotlight she'd always occupied. I had work to do in the shadows. I entered my sketches in local competitions under a pseudonym. C. West, won a few small prizes, built a portfolio that existed outside my family's awareness, protected by distance and deliberate omission. Each award went into a folder I kept at Jade's house, physical proof that my vision had value even if my mother couldn't see it. Jade was the only one who knew about my rebirth, though not in those terms. I couldn't explain that I'd lived this all before, that I was moving through time with the advantage of hindsight, but she understood the new determination in me, the quiet certainty that had replaced my old desperate need for validation. "You're different," she said once, watching me photograph a sketch of a library designed around natural light. "Since that day, you didn't text me back." Something changed. "I died," I almost said, but instead, I realised I was drawing for the wrong audience. She nodded like that made perfect sense. "So, who's the right audience?" "The buildings themselves, the people who will use them someday." I carefully stored the sketch in a protective sleeve. And me. Mostly me. In my second year back, I started attending open lectures at the university downtown, slipped into the back of amphitheatres where visiting architects discussed their work, their process, their philosophical approach to space and structure. I took notes in the margins of my sketchbooks, connecting their words to my own evolving designs. One evening, a woman named Dr. Patricia Emerson gave a talk on sustainable architecture and community design. She showed slides of buildings that seemed to grow from their environments, structures that honoured both human need and ecological balance. I sat transfixed, watching her explain how architecture could be an act of healing, how thoughtful design could repair the relationship between people and their spaces. After the lecture, I waited in line to speak with her. My heart hammered as I approached, but I forced my voice steady. "Dr. Emerson, I'm a high school student interested in architecture. I've been teaching myself, but I don't know if that's enough." She looked at me with sharp, kind eyes. "Formal education is valuable, but self-teaching shows passion and discipline. Do you have work I could see?" I pulled out my phone, showed her photographs of my recent sketches, watched her face as she scrolled through images of impossible buildings, structures that existed only in graphite and imagination. These are extraordinary," she said quietly. "The technical understanding combined with visionary scope. This is rare." She looked up at me. "What's your name?" Clara Westwood. Clara, I teach at the Architectural Institute. We have a scholarship program for promising students. Would you be interested in applying? The moment crystallized. This was it, the door I'd been building toward brick by brick, sketch by sketch. Yes, I said. Very much yes. She handed me her card. Email me when you're ready to apply. I'd like to see your full portfolio. I floated home that night, Dr. Emerson's card tucked safely in my pocket. The path was clarifying. I had one more year to finish high school, one more year to complete my portfolio, and this time I knew exactly how to protect it. At home, the kitchen light was on. Through the window, I could see Mum and Isabella at the table, heads bent over nursing school brochures. Dad was reading the paper in his usual chair. The scene was so familiar, so perfectly preserved from my first life, that for a moment I felt like a ghost watching my own past. But I wasn't a ghost. I was solid, real, armed with knowledge they couldn't imagine. I went in through the back door, greeted them briefly, and headed to my room. Behind my closed door, I added Dr. Emerson's card to my secret folder and returned to the sketch I'd been working on. A museum designed to hold silence, to create pockets of contemplative stillness in the chaos of modern life. My phone buzzed. Jade. Coffee tomorrow, before school? Yes, I texted back. I have news. In my third year back, everything accelerated. Isabella got her acceptance to nursing school in March, right on schedule. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, and the house filled with celebration and relief. I watched from the kitchen doorway as Dad opened champagne and Mum cried happy tears. I'm so proud of you, Mum said, holding Isabella's face in her hands. You're going to do something real with your life. The words that would have destroyed me before now felt like background noise. I'd already mourned this love, already accepted that some people could only see worth in the shapes they understood. But something was different this time. Isabella looked at me over Mum's shoulder, and I saw guilt flicker in her expression. She knew. Maybe she'd always known that our parents' pride in her came at my expense, that her light required my shadow. Thanks, Mum, she said softly, then, louder, Clara's been helping me study. She's really good at explaining complex systems visually, say. Mum blinked, turned to look at me. You've been helping? Just some diagrams for her anatomy class, I said with a shrug. Drawing is useful for lots of things. It was a small moment, easily overlooked, but I saw Isabella's grateful smile, saw the tiny bridge she was trying to build between us. In my first life, resentment had poisoned everything between us. This time, I was learning that she wasn't my enemy, just another daughter trying to survive our parents' limited capacity for seeing. That night, Isabella came to my room, knocked softly before entering. Hey, she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. I wanted to say thank you for the diagrams, but also for being nice about this, about nursing school. You earned it, I said simply. You worked hard, you should celebrate. Yeah, but she picked at my blanket. I know Mum and Dad are weird about your art stuff. I know they don't get it. They don't have to get it. She looked up at me, surprised by my calm. Doesn't that hurt? It used to. I set down my pencil. But their opinion isn't the final word on what my work is worth. Other people will understand even if they don't. You sound so sure. I am sure. I smiled at her, and it was genuine. I'm going to be an architect, Isabella. I'm going to build real buildings that real people use, and Mum and Dad will either figure out how to be proud of that, or they won't. But it's happening either way. She hugged me suddenly, fiercely. I think you're amazing, she whispered. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. I hugged her back, feeling the complicated tangle of love and hurt and forgiveness that defined us. She was still the favourite, still the practical one, the one who made sense to them. But that didn't have to destroy us. "You're amazing too," I told her. "You're going to be an incredible nurse." After she left, I returned to my sketchbook. The moment felt significant. A small repair in the fabric of family. A stitch holding together what my first death had torn apart. The deposit for Isabella's nursing school was due in 2 weeks. I knew what would happen next. Knew Mum was calculating how to scrape together the money. Knew she would look at my sketchbook with those practical, desperate eyes and see only paper that could be converted to cash. But this time, my sketchbooks were empty. Just practice drawings, experiments, nothing important. The real portfolio lived in digital files and a safe deposit box at the bank where I'd opened my secret account. Mum could tear apart every sketchbook in the house and she'd find nothing worth selling. I'd learnt to protect myself, to build walls that looked like open doors. The day came on a Thursday. I was at school when it happened, but I knew. Felt it in my bones the way you feel weather changing. When I got home, the house was quiet. Mum's car was gone. The torn sketchbook was on the kitchen table, empty wire binding curled like a confession. She'd done it, just like before. I picked up the binding and felt nothing. No rage, no heartbreak. Just the calm satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. She'd torn apart sketches I deliberately made disposable, practice drawings of buildings I'd already surpassed. My real work was safe. I waited. Mum came home an hour later. I heard her footsteps, heard her pause when she saw me standing in the kitchen. "Clara, She had money in her hand, $300 in rumpled bills. "I took your drawings to the gallery. That dealer, Victor Reeves, he bought them. For Isabella's deposit?" "I know," I said quietly. She looked stricken. "I'm sorry. I know you worked hard on them. But I'll pay you back, I promise. Once things settle, keep it," I said. "Isabella needs it more than I do." Her relief was visible, and something about that relief made me sad. She'd expected a fight, tears, accusations. Instead, I was giving her permission to value my sister over me again. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for understanding." But she didn't understand. Didn't realise she'd destroyed nothing, protected nothing. Didn't know that her daughter had already learned to hide anything she couldn't afford to lose. "I need to finish homework," I said, and left her standing in the kitchen with her blood money and her blind certainty that she'd done what was necessary. In my room, I opened my laptop and looked at the real portfolio. 12 architectural sketches that existed only in digital form, protected by passwords and cloud backups. The same 12 I'd completed in my first life. But better, this time. Refined by knowledge and careful study. I opened my email and began composing a message to Dr. Emerson. "Dear Dr. Emerson, I'm ready to apply for the scholarship program. Attached is my complete portfolio of architectural designs. I look forward to your feedback. Sincerely, Clara Westwood." I attached the files, read the email 3 times to check for errors, and hit send. Then I pulled out a fresh sketchbook and began drawing again. Simple practice sketches, deliberately mediocre. The kind Mum could tear apart next time she needed quick money, and a justification for valuing one daughter's dream over another's. I'd learned to keep 2 portfolios, one for sacrifice, one for survival. She could have the first. The second belonged only to me. The call came 3 weeks later. I was working the evening shift at the coffee shop when my phone buzzed. "Is this Clara Westwood?" A woman's voice, professional and warm. "Yes, speaking." "This is Dr. Patricia Emerson from the Architectural Institute. I am calling about your scholarship application." My heart stopped. Started again, faster. "Yes?" Your portfolio is exceptional, Clara. The committee reviewed it yesterday and we're unanimous. She paused, and I heard her smile through the phone. We'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our program, including a stipend for materials and housing. The coffee shop noise faded. The world narrowed to just her voice and the pounding of my pulse in my ears. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're excited to have you. Talent like yours doesn't come along often. She paused again. Can I ask you something? I had lunch on Morrison Street last week. There's a gallery there, Victor Reeves's place. He had some architectural sketches in the window. Good work, but derivative. Nothing like the sophistication I saw in your portfolio. He said they were from a local student. I gripped the phone tighter. That's interesting. I thought so too. The technique was similar to yours, but without the depth or innovation, almost like practice work or earlier attempts. Some people plateau, I said carefully. They find a level that works and stop pushing. True, but you're clearly still evolving. The cathedral sketch in particular, the way you've handled transparency and structural support, it's remarkable. We talked for 10 more minutes about the programme, start dates, housing arrangements. When I finally hung up, my hands were shaking. Jade was watching from behind the counter. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. I got in, I said. Full scholarship. I'm going to the institute. She screamed, actually screamed, and ran around the counter to hug me. The other baristas looked over, curious and smiling. One started clapping, and soon the whole shop was applauding this drama they didn't understand. You did it, Jade said, pulling back to look at me. You actually did it. I did it, I repeated, testing the words. They felt real, solid, true. That night, I went home and set the acceptance letter on the kitchen table. Formal offer, full scholarship, start date in September. Evidence that my drawings had been worth more than gas money. I told them at dinner. The kitchen was warm with the smell of Mum's pasta sauce. The same sauce she'd mentioned the night I'd swallowed the pills in that other lifetime. The familiarity of it made my chest ache. I got into the Architectural Institute, I said, setting the letter on the table. Full scholarship. Silence. Mum's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Dad set down his water glass slowly. Isabella looked up from her phone, actually surprised. Scholarship? Mum's voice was careful, uncertain. Full ride, including housing and a materials stipend. They saw my portfolio and offered admission with financial support. Portfolio? She blinked. But I thought the sketches I took to the gallery were practice work, I said simply. I keep my real portfolio digital, backed up, protected. The words hung between us. I watched comprehension dawn across her face. The realization that the daughter she'd considered impractical had somehow constructed a legitimate future from the dream she'd dismissed, had learned to protect herself from the very family that should have protected her. That's wonderful, Clara. Dad found his voice first, and I heard genuine pride in it. Maybe confusion too, but the pride was real. Architecture school. That's really something. Mum was staring at the acceptance letter, like it was written in a foreign language. I didn't know you were that serious about it. I thought, after I sold those drawings, I thought you'd understand it was just a hobby. You sold practice sketches, Mum, not my dreams. I learned to separate the two. The quiet statement held more weight than any accusation. Isabella was watching the exchange with wide eyes, recognizing the shift in power dynamics, the careful way I was refusing to be the smaller person anymore. Can we see them? Isabella asked suddenly. The real portfolio? I pulled out my phone, opened the file, passed it to her, watched as she scrolled through the 12 architectural sketches, her expression shifting from curiosity to awe. Clara, holy shit, these are incredible. Language, Mum said automatically. but her voice was distant. She was leaning over to look at the phone too, seeing for the first time what her daughter had been creating in the margins of her disapproval. Dad joined them, and for a moment we all stood around my phone, looking at buildings that didn't exist yet but might someday. Buildings I'd designed in the quiet spaces of my second life, learning to value them even when no one else would. "I want to see them properly," Isabella said, "on a real screen. Can you send them to me?" "Sure." I sent the files to her email. "Forward them to Mom and Dad if you want." That night, I heard them in the living room, looking at my portfolio on the television screen. Heard Mum's voice softer than usual, saying something I couldn't quite make out. Heard Dad's rumbling response, something about "always knew she had talent." They were rewriting history, claiming they'd seen my potential all along. It wasn't true, but I didn't need to correct them. The truth lived in my memory of pills swallowed in darkness, of a mother who'd torn apart my dreams for gas money. This version, where they'd always believed in me, was a gentle fiction. I could let them have it. I had something better. I had proof. The summer before I left for the Institute, I did one more thing. I walked into Victor Reeve's gallery on Morrison Street, the place where Mum had sold my practice sketches months earlier. Victor was behind the counter, arranging some ceramic pieces. He looked up when I entered, smiled professionally. "Can I help you?" "My name is Clara Westwood. My mother sold you some architectural sketches a few months ago." Recognition flickered. "Ah, yes, decent technical work. I sold them to a local collector for a modest price. I'm starting at the Architectural Institute in the fall, full scholarship. I was wondering if you'd be interested in representing my work properly this time." He raised an eyebrow. "Your work? Those sketches were yours?" "Practice pieces. I have a real portfolio now. Would you like to see it?" I pulled out my tablet, showed him the 12 sketches that had earned me the scholarship. Watched his expression change from polite interest to genuine attention. "These are remarkable," he said after a long moment. "The progression from those earlier pieces is significant. You've evolved rapidly." I had motivation. He looked at me with new respect. "I'd be honoured to represent this work. Would you consider consignment? I think we could position these as architectural art, get serious attention from collectors and design firms." We negotiated terms, 70% to me, 30% to the gallery. He'd display them in the front window, feature them as part of his emerging talent series. Give me business cards, help me build professional connections. "Your mother," he said as I was leaving. "When she brought those first sketches, she seemed conflicted, like she wasn't sure if she was doing the right thing." "She wasn't," I said simply, "but we've all learned from it." The display went up the following week. I brought my family to see it on a Saturday afternoon. All 4 of us, just like in the future I remembered. I watched from across the street as they approached the window, saw them stop and stare at the display Victor had created. My 12 sketches arranged like a story, each one illuminated by carefully positioned lights. Mum's hand went to her mouth. Dad leaned closer to the glass, squinting at the details. Isabella pressed her palm against the window like she was trying to touch the drawings through the barrier. I crossed the street and joined them. "These are mine," I said. Mum turned to me and her eyes were wet. "Clara, I had no idea. When I took those other drawings, I thought I didn't understand you were capable of this." "I was always capable of this, Mum. You just never looked closely enough." The truth sat between us, heavy and undeniable. She'd seen me as disposable, had treated my dreams like recyclable material to be converted into her priorities. And I'd learned to protect myself from her, had learned that love could be blind and still claim to see clearly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't see you." The apology felt fragile, incomplete, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a tiny crack in the wall of her certainty. Isabella hugged me suddenly, fiercely, "You're amazing," she said. "I knew you were talented, but this is beyond anything I imagined." Dad put his hand on my shoulder. "Your mother and I, we made mistakes. We should have supported you better." "You supported the daughter you understood," I said. "That's human. But I'm this daughter too, and I'm not asking permission anymore." We stood together in front of the gallery window, and I felt the shift complete itself. I wasn't the disposable daughter anymore, the one whose dreams could be torn apart for convenience. I was Clara Westwood, scholarship recipient, emerging architectural artist, builder of impossible structures. The girl who'd swallowed pills in the dark was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who'd learned that survival meant protecting yourself even from the people who claimed to love you, especially from them. The years that followed unfolded exactly as I'd rebuilt them. I excelled at the Institute. My self-taught skills, refined by formal education and professional mentorship, set me apart from classmates who'd followed traditional paths. Professors noticed my unusual approach, the way I thought about space and structure from angles they hadn't considered. Dot Emerson became my mentor. She guided me through complex projects, challenged me to push beyond comfortable designs, taught me that architecture was as much about understanding human psychology as engineering principles. "You have something unique," she told me during my second year. "Most students your age are still learning technical skills, but you already understand how buildings make people feel." Because I died in a room that felt like a coffin, I didn't say. Because I'd learned that space could crush you or free you, that architecture was about emotional survival as much as physical shelter. I interned with firms that designed museums and libraries, spaces that held human dreams in concrete and glass. I learned how to translate vision into blueprint, how to navigate building codes and budget constraints without sacrificing the soul of a design. My thesis project was a community centre that incorporated sustainable materials and natural light in unprecedented ways. The building was actually constructed in a neighbourhood recovering from economic collapse, rising from empty ground into three-dimensional reality, exactly as I'd envisioned it. I stood at the dedication ceremony, watching people walk through the spaces I'd designed. Children ran through the main hall where light fell through skylights, positioned to track the sun's movement. Adults gathered in the library I'd positioned to face the morning, where readers could watch the world wake up while they studied or dreamed. Mum and Dad came to the ceremony. They'd aged in the years since I'd left home, greyer, slower, marked by time and possibly regret. They walked through the building quietly, touching the walls, looking up at the architectural details I'd obsessed over. "I should have seen it," Mum said when she found me standing in the main hall. "I should have known what you were." "You saw what you needed to see," I replied. "We all did." She nodded, accepting the gentle forgiveness I was offering. "For what it's worth, I kept every article about you, every mention in the architectural journals. I have a whole folder." "That's worth something," I said, and meant it. We stood together in the light falling through the windows I'd designed, and the silence between us felt less like distance and more like acceptance. She would never fully understand what she'd almost destroyed, would never grasp how close she'd come to having a dead daughter instead of a successful one. But she was trying now, in her limited way, to bridge the gap her blindness had created. Isabella came to the ceremony too, bringing photos of the paediatric ward where she worked. She'd become an excellent nurse, exactly as everyone had predicted. We stood together looking at pictures of her with tiny patients, and I felt genuine pride in her accomplishments. "We both made it," she said softly, "despite everything." "Because of everything," I corrected. "The struggle taught us what we were made of." She squeezed my hand. "I'm glad we both survived." I thought about the pills, the darkness, the ending I'd chosen in another timeline. Thought about waking up in the past with memory intact, and determination hardened into purpose. Me too. Years later, more years than I'd lived in my first life, I received a call from Victor Reeves. "Clara, I have something you need to see." I drove to Morrison Street, parked in front of the gallery where it had all shifted, where my second life had truly begun. The street had gentrified in the years since my mother had walked this sidewalk, carrying my torn sketches. New restaurants, upscale boutiques, a yoga studio where an auto repair shop used to be. Victor was standing in the window display. When he saw me, he stepped back and gestured with visible excitement. My original 12 sketches were arranged in the same configuration as they'd been 15 years earlier. But now they were framed in museum-quality materials, elevated to fine art status, lit with professional gallery lighting that made each line sing. "A collector returned these," Victor explained, "wanted me to display them again before donating them to the Metropolitan Museum's architectural collection. They're going to be part of a retrospective on early 21st century design visionaries." I stared at the cathedral sketch, the one that had launched everything. The glass and steel structure I'd imagined as a broken teenager, trying to understand how something beautiful could be made from fragments. "The irony is perfect," Victor continued. "These sketches that launched your career, they're being archived as historical documents now, the drawings that preceded the buildings." "They almost didn't exist," I said quietly. "What do you mean?" "My mother tried to sell them once, or versions of them. She didn't understand what they were worth." Victor looked at me thoughtfully. "But she didn't succeed. You protected them." "I learned to." We stood together in front of the window, looking at the evidence of a life reclaimed, a future rebuilt from the ashes of a past that no longer existed. Other pedestrians walked by, some stopping to look at the sketches, some moving on without noticing. The world turned at its regular speed, indifferent to the quiet miracles happening within it. My phone buzzed, a text from Jade. "Dinner tonight? New Thai place on 7th? Heard they have excellent pad CU." I smiled and typed back, "Yes. 7:30? Perfect. Can't wait to hear about the museum thing." I sent her a heart emoji and pocketed the phone. Jade had been constant through both lifetimes, though she only remembered one. She'd watched me transform from the desperate girl I'd been to the architect I'd become, and had never once questioned my determination or doubted my vision. Some people saw you clearly from the beginning. Others learned to focus only after you'd already saved yourself. Behind me, Morrison Street continued its ordinary Saturday rhythm. I turned away from the gallery window and walked into the afternoon sun, leaving the past exactly where it belonged, preserved behind glass, beautiful and complete, but no longer mine to carry. The cathedral I'd sketched at 16 had been built 3 years ago in downtown Philadelphia. I'd visited it once, stood inside the space where light fractured through the steel and glass exactly as I'd imagined, and felt the circle close. I'd drawn buildings from broken places, and then I'd built them. I'd transformed paper dreams into stone reality. I'd taken the worst moment of my life, the pills, the darkness, the ending, and used it as foundation, as blueprint, as the starting point for everything that came after. My mother would live with the memory of almost losing me, of almost destroying the daughter who'd become something she couldn't predict or control. That wasn't punishment. It was simply truth, the natural consequence of love that couldn't recognize itself until it was almost too late. She would carry that weight until her last breath, haunted by what she'd nearly cost us both. And I would live with the memory of dying and returning, of being given a second chance to build myself correctly this time. I'd learned to protect my dreams from people who saw them as disposable. I'd learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is refuse to let others define your worth. I got into my car and drove toward 7th Street, toward Thai, food and friendship, toward an ordinary evening in an extraordinary life I'd constructed from scratch. The sketches would go to the museum. They would hang beside the work of architects and visionaries, evidence that dreams drawn carefully enough could become real. Evidence that a girl who died in darkness could wake up to light and try again. And somewhere in the universe, in a timeline that no longer existed, a mother was tearing apart her daughter's portfolio for gas money, not knowing she was destroying the only thing keeping that daughter tethered to life. But in this timeline, though it's real one, the one I'd fought to create, those sketches were safe, protected, valued. That was enough. That was everything. That was the only revenge worth taking, the kind where you simply refuse to disappear, where you build yourself so solid and real that dismissal becomes impossible. My mother had tried to sell my dreams. After Rebirth, she found them in a gallery window, framed and priceless and forever beyond her reach. And I found myself, built myself, became myself. The girl who swallowed pills was gone. The architect who designed light remained. That was the truest form of justice. Not punishment, but transformation. Not revenge, but renaissance. I parked on 7th Street and walked toward the restaurant where Jade was waiting. The evening air was warm, the city alive with movement and possibility. My phone buzzed again, an email from the museum curator, discussing the retrospective, asking if I'd be willing to speak at the opening. Yes, I would speak. I would tell them about dreaming in graphite, about buildings that existed first in imagination. I wouldn't tell them about dying and returning, about pills swallowed in darkness and eyes open to second chances. Some miracles were too quiet for public telling. Some resurrections happened in the private spaces of the heart, where death and rebirth wore the same face and answered to the same name. Clara. The girl who'd drawn her way back to life. The architect who'd built herself from broken pieces into something whole. That was my story. That was my building. That was my light. And no one, not even my own mother, could tear it down again.